So a narrative in broken tablets. That phrase, the broken tablets, is going to be a guiding metaphor for all of my lectures. And I want to talk a little bit more about it right now. And I want to compare it to things like film, television, novels, etc. Anytime we watch a narrative, a good story makes us forget the means through which the story is being conveyed. When you watch a film or a television show, for example, there aren't many moments that take us out of the story or interrupt the story in a way that makes us self-conscious that we're actually watching a television show, or reminds us that we're watching a film, or moments in a novel that cut off the narrative and remind you that you're actually reading a novel. And the same goes with video games, novels, radio, or any other media. For the most part, a medium wants the medium itself, the form in which something is told, to withdraw into the background and the narrative and story to come to the foreground. But this is not so much the case with Gilgamesh, which comes to us, as I've already said, with the scars and fragments on the surface of the text. The ellipses quite literally indicate moments where the narrative has been broken and fragmented and cut off. So what we're giving here is a fractured narrative. And that fractured narrative is actually a really good metaphor to understand Gilgamesh, his character. He is a mortal human being that has godlike qualities within him, but he is a human being who is struggling to come to terms with his own brokenness, his own vulnerability, and his own mortality. And the entire epic narrates that progression. How an arrogant king who seems invincible to himself and to others at the beginning is slowly worn down and broken through a series of episodes unto the point where he becomes a wiser ruler by the end of the narrative, because he starts to learn about his humanity. And one of the main ways he starts to learn about that humanity is through the friendship he has with Enkidu, the other major character. So some facts to get us started here. Gilgamesh comes from ancient Sumeria, a region where the first civilizations arose and the site of modern-day Iraq. So Gilgamesh, the renowned king of Uruk in Mesopotamia, ruled Uruk, the ancient city of Uruk, around 2800 to 2750 BCE. He is celebrated in poems after his death, but the stories likely moved from memory and oral tradition and legacy to legend. They probably circulated in Sumeria. They became part of the Akkadian language, and then eventually were translated and written down during the Babylonian Empire. The stories were collected and organized by both Babylonian and Assyrian scribes and poets. So the story survived his death, and we see a transition from the oral poems into the first Sumerian copies, which were written around 2100 BC. And these early tales likely didn't form a narrative cycle. They probably didn't have a connecting theme of the fear of death and the quest for immortality. That was probably given slightly later when they were brought together into a single narrative. So some other facts to think about as we continue here is the existence of Gilgamesh and the tablets has actually only been known to Western civilization for about 150 years. So today's version of Gilgamesh is compiled from 73 different tablets in various languages. In their complete state, the epic comprises about 2,900 lines written on 11 different clay tablets, and only about 60% of the text is preserved. And many of the ancient writers describe the epic as the Gilgamesh cycle, or a poem in 12 songs or cantos, which were about 300 lines each. So as we read the tablets, you can think of them as loosely connected episodes with a narrative arc that gives them an epic feel, connected by themes of mortality, the quest for wisdom and immortality, and human themes of human beings coming to terms with death and vulnerability in ways that an arrogant king might be reluctant to face. So the place or the region from which the tale and in which the tale takes place is Mesopotamia. Uruk was an ancient city in Mesopotamia, and Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk in this ancient city. Okay, so this map helps you to kind of realize where this was. It is in modern-day Iraq. As you can see there, Uruk is on the Euphrates River, close to Baghdad. Here is another map. Again, this shows you that Mesopotamia, the word Mesopotamia, means between rivers in ancient Greek. So a little bit about the Sumerians. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'll talk a little bit about the Sumerians here. The Sumerians were the first literate inhabitants of Mesopotamia. Ancient Sumeria is often known by scholars as the first world city. It's the site for the emergence of culture, cities, and civilization. They were the first literate inhabitants of Mesopotamia. It's the place where cuneiform, the writing technology that I talked about, is invented. It's also the place where agriculture and civilization comes to flourish. The Sumerians were gifted in laws and language. They were also known for irrigating the country and building cities. And Gilgamesh, we learn in the narrative, is the king who builds great cities, walls to protect his city, and he's known for the foundations of the monuments that he has built in the city. The Sumerian language, with the tale of Gilgamesh, was written down in cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped marks, and another lecture we'll talk about this in more detail. So the city-state of Uruk was the largest settlement in Babylonia. It's the place where the first evidence of writing is found, and it was characterized, Uruk, according to archaeologists, as a site that went through rapid urbanization and growth. And you can kind of see here from this image the kind of architectural and infrastructural kind of systems that the city would have had. We find the first evidence of writing here, as I said. We find evidence of irrigation. We find evidence of record keeping and accounting. And scholars have called the city of Uruk the first city in world history. And the site was dominated by a large temple estates in the center, which were needed not for just religious purposes, but the temples were needed for accounting purposes, where revenues would be dispersed. And this led to the record keeping of economic data on clay tablets.